All right, welcome everybody to an exciting webinar today that we're going to offer. We've titled this Soft Skills Increase Hard Dollars, How Leadership Impacts M&A and Business Transitions. My name is Scott Scrogin. I serve as the Strategic Initiatives Director at ConnectWise with the IT Nation. I'm joined by three outstanding partners here that are going to introduce themselves. Without any further ado, I'll jump in. I can see them here on the screen. Nate Austin, you are in my upper left corner of the box here. It's not quite a 9-square layout, but I've got 2x2, so let's make it easy. How about introducing yourself, and how about giving us a little bit of intro on your M&A or business transition experience?
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, we're actually right in the midst of our sixth M&A activity, just signed at the end of the year. We're finishing the integration on the 5th and just starting the integration on the 6th. So that's kind of where we're at with merger and acquisition activity throughout the experiences that we've had. My role was one of the founders of the organization. Historically, I've been leading sales and marketing. And as we've kind of grown and going to the next level, I'm actually stepping into a COO capacity. And I think that speaks a little bit to like some of the vision that we've had to try to do from a leadership perspective, like what does our leadership structure need to change in order to handle and continue the growth path. So that's been my experience, and I'm looking forward to learning from Reed and James and sharing mistakes we've made.
All right. Reed, welcome. How about an intro and your experiences?
Thanks, Scott. Reed Wilson, the CEO of Coursera. Been in the MSP space since 2007. We got serious about M&A in 2022. We have done about 14 acquisitions over the past 30-ish months. My experience with M&A goes back even further back. I was on the other side of this, working for a software company that got acquired by a really big organization. And what I think that has helped me do is learn what it's like to be like on both sides of the coin. Because oftentimes too much of our view is kind of focused on us and our experience, and not necessarily maybe what those who might be going through the process are experiencing.
Great. And James, good to see you as always. How about your intro and where you're at?
Thanks, Scott. Excited to be here with everyone today. James Richards with New Charter Technologies. I've been in the MSP space for about 35 years, and we joined New Charter Technology, which is private equity backed by Oval in 2020. Since about the last 4 years, we've done approximately 29 acquisitions. The benefit that we see, especially in our leadership, as we're going to topically talk about today, has been the ability to grow within the organization and allow other leaders within our organization to grow up into the business and take on new roles. And just really excited to work with our CEO, Peter Melby, Chris Louise, and Kenny, and a bunch of people at New Charter and Oval Partners on this. So excited to be here with everyone.
Outstanding. In full disclosure, all these partners are currently in the IT Nation Evolve program. I've known them probably for approaching a decade. Despite my facilitation, James has risen to heights at New Charter, so we're glad to hear that. And James, I'm coming right back to you. You kind of led into that, but each organization, from whether it's private equity or not, M&A related, has a structure that they choose. And how about talking a little bit or continue on about how you at New Charter are developing leaders within your organization for business transition that they're undergoing?
Sure. The concept at New Charter is to bring your business into the group and then continue to run it as a organization in your region that you have. We want our leaders to stay with us, but it also provides a lot of opportunities. Myself, I was asked to be a group president in 2022, which basically means about 10 of our companies operationally work and report up to me. And that allowed a lot of room for the previous leaders on the executive team at Stronghold Data to move into new, larger roles within the company. David Markley is now the president of Stronghold Data. So David's been with me for years, and now he's actually running the location I'm actually sitting in right now. So a lot of opportunities also within our core services like in finance and HR and things. A lot of people that were at the operating company level have been able to take on larger roles at a corporate space and provide those similar services to many companies. So it's a great path.
Right. So am I right that you've got a team in Joplin that reports to David, David reports to you, and you report to Peter? Is that the way from a structural standpoint I should think of it?
Yeah. So Chris, Louise has pretty much been, so there's three group presidents, Chris, Louise, Kenny, Rounds, and myself. And Kenny and I report to Chris, and Chris sits at our executive team. And so we are reporting up to him, and then he kind of works with Peter at an operational level for the entire organization.
Great. Thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah.
Let's swing over to Reed. I know you, as you mentioned, private equity backed. How about from your perspective, how are you and Courser going about developing leaders as they make these transitions?
Yeah, it's a great question. James, love what you said there. A lot of really great nuggets there to take away. I think I can't understate or overstate, I guess would be the right term, overstate. I can't overstate the importance of Evolve and how critical that has been, because, you get exposed to so many different folks and that are in different parts of the journey, right? And so when we think about leaders in our organization, we are, I'd say we're pretty heavy-handed that you need to be, if you're not already in Evolve, you need to get connected with a peer group. I think, you learn more in a group than you do by yourself, but B, you're also learning from others and who have different perspectives. So that's been really pivotal for us. We're fortunate in that kind of my first big hire in 2022 was a director of employee engagement, and her full-time job is training and development for staff. And so things that she does on a regular basis is conduct webinars on, what is gross margin, right? And that might seem basic to, some of the folks that might be listening to this webinar, but I can guarantee you that at one point when you were a leader, you didn't really fully understand what gross margin was either. And so if we're really going to grow people and grow them well, we think we've got to spend a ton of time investing in them. And she does that on a every single month basis. Engagement there has been huge. And then the third thing that's been super powerful for us is our sponsor actually has our sponsor Shore Capital out of Chicago. They actually have a handful of what they call peak performer programs that are instrumental in teaching our team, like, what is it like to operate inside a private equity backed business? And we've had sales leaders, operations leaders, finance leaders go through that process, and every one of them has come out stronger on the other side.
Great.
That's cool.
Yeah, it really got some defined programs, and it's always important to have a leader focused on developing leaders, right? That's one of the keys. So, Nate, how about continuing on the conversation? You mentioned the strong number of acquisitions that MyTech has made and is continuing to make. What's the perspective there, and what are you doing to develop leaders along that journey?
Yeah, I think there's a couple nuances to, we are not private equity backed. We are, self-funding those things. We're actually in the process of potentially finding a debt partner to help fund some accelerated M&A activity, but non-private equity. And the other thing is, I think that's also important nuance based on the last, James and Reed's comments, is that our plan is that we fully integrate them. So they get the MyTech brand. Again, not saying that's right or wrong. That's the direction that we're going. And we have built a shared services model, again, for, HR, finance, NOC services, consulting practice, some of those things that really help support branches. And our goal is to go into different geographies, meaning that, so we're in the Twin Cities, we're in Denver, San Antonio, and then we have a spot in California. And, so that's kind of our goal. And then we take these branch operations, we have local leaders that run the branches, and so there's a local general manager, local sales manager, local service managers. And so, that's one of the ways in which we've decided to grow, so that we can really apply the things that we've learned in one location, and then kind of, cookie cutter that to some extent to others. I think the value and some of the things we've been really intentional about, especially as we've grown, is trying to foster, in addition to some like core leadership programming training that we've been doing and participating involved, since those were mentioned by James and Reed, I'll try and offer a slightly different insight, is that we've really tried to foster the similar, if you have the same function at a branch, like your sales manager at this branch, to connect and be very intentional about connecting sales managers and service managers and professional services managers together, so that they can learn from each other in a peer group kind of way, but also but within our company, so they can go a little bit deeper. And it's really been great to see how we've been able to start dividing and conquering just initiatives and things we're working on and areas we're trying to improve. Whereas when we were smaller, it was like oftentimes like a person, maybe a couple people to do that. And so it's been fun to see that engagement. And I think the point is that to try and be intentional about that, right? And just foster a regular cadence of engaging those team members, creating some communication channels where those folks can engage and communicate. And again, the peer group kind of mentality where we're intentional about trying to get our team together, our leaders together on a quarterly basis moving forward to do ongoing kind of blocking and tackling. And one of the things Reed said I think is really critical is that there's so much foundational business acumen that we as owners, if you're in the Evolve community, you learned a lot of that through Evolve and like learned through the service leadership, financial benchmarking, and really trying to cascade and translate that so that part of our ability as leaders to continue to grow, because we need to start, as we grow, we have to start focusing on other things, right? So backfilling that with team members, they have to understand that basic blocking and tackling, some of that same knowledge that we grew and learned, so that we're not having to get pulled back into some of the operational things we're expecting our managers to do. So yeah, those are probably some of the key things that we really focused on, trying to get our managers basic blocking and tackling so they understand the components of their metrics, how to measure the metrics and how to manage to them, but as well as doing like cross-functional or similar cross-location, but same role kind of connections and growth.
Thank you for that, Nate. I'm going to let you catch your breath, but I'm coming right back to you with the next question. And the point I wanted to make here, the previous webinar in this series that we did was focused on different frameworks for integration. And Nate pointed it out. You've probably already picked up on it. I heard some comments from James and Reed as well. Just that idea that, as Nate pointed out, really a full integration model, which ranges down to hybrid, ranges down to very much of a maintenance of the operating company model of branding. And then we can talk about, and did talk about in that webinar, differences in terms of back-end integration. And we're not going there now, but I will say that can have an impact in relationship to leadership development as well. So just pointing that opportunity out. If you're at IT Nation Grow, you've got access to those topics and to the webinar. Nate, I'm coming back to you. I know that MyTech has a strong emphasis on culture. And the point I want to make there is, if you've done these integrations and acquisitions, you pretty much have an M&A infused culture is how I would refer to it, meaning the N+1 acquisition that you make is not a surprise anymore. Maybe a surprise to the acquiring company, but what guidance could you give to partners who have not been acquired? Because there's always that discussion about how to prepare leaders for a potential acquisition. Some not at all as a single owner. Others make some preparation around, we could be acquired, we could be acquiring others. What are your thoughts there from a cultural perspective?
That's a great question, Scott. I think a few things that come to mind are that, and I'll try and hit these kind of bullet pointed. One is, I think when, as you're going through integration, like let's say you're a leader that didn't know that this was happening and you get notified basically the day after, or, maybe a week after the deal signed, it comes as a surprise, like maybe your cheese is going to get moved. So I think, and sometimes there's an eagerness to like just dive in. And I think there's a real risk of the distraction that can come from before integration is really there to try and do things that you're not yet equipped to do. And really try and learn things that the process isn't set, the systems and tools aren't supporting it, the training isn't there, like all these things. And that's something that we have found, and kind of where we've actually pulled back on some of that communication, where we're excited to get them involved too, but sometimes too much of that early on is it's really trying to define that cadence. So I think if you're that leader that found out your organization was acquired or merging, I think that's one of the tips. I also think that a lesson that's learned is oftentimes if you're that service manager or maybe sales manager, general manager, any one of those managerial roles, maybe even the owner that's being acquired or merging, I think there's a difference in how you have been the go-to resource for your team and maybe the one who can make all the decisions. And that part of being a good leader is also learning to be able to follow. And if your organization just got acquired or you're merging in with a larger organization, you're going to have to, that muscle of being able to follow is an important one that oftentimes we don't get to practice. That's one that we just had this conversation internally recently, because like when my business partner Leaf, Arlen actually told us years ago, he's like, look, dummies, it doesn't take 4 people to run an organization your side. This was back in like 2008 or something. And so we elected Leaf to be our CEO. And then the rest of us at the time, we had to learn how to follow. And so that's something that I think that it was tough for me to learn that. And I think sometimes we forget the lessons that we've learned, not unlike what Reed said earlier. Some of the lessons that we've learned, we forgot that we actually had to learn them, and the pain that we had when we learned them. And so I think that was one of the big lessons. And the last one I would say that comes to mind from a culture perspective is that growth, this type of growth creates opportunity. And so I would encourage the mindset of this isn't about, I'm going to get overlooked or I'm going to lose my job. Like there's unknown opportunity that gets created when these things happen. And I would always encourage people to look to the positive of that and really just invest in being the best leader, manager, performer that you can be, because there will be opportunity that comes out of this. And if you're focused on the negative consequences, that there are always unintended consequences, then you're probably going to be overlooked for those opportunities. But as an individual contributor or as a leader, if you can be focused on the positive of that and realize that there will be opportunity that most of the leaders might not even realize exist until you kind of get to that point, that would be the last thing from a culture perspective I would strongly encourage.
Great. I appreciate you sharing that. And now that we've got the overall development, we've got some of the culture discussed, I want to go to Reed and James. You guys have seen a lot of deals, and what I want to talk about is the need to develop leaders to handle due diligence. And so I'm not speaking necessarily from your due diligence, but from theirs. Again, someone who's going to be acquired in general and hasn't been through it before. From the interviews that I conduct, they talk to me about how they're almost being asked to do 2 jobs. One job is to run the business, and the other is to complete all the due diligence activities, many times with limited staff, or what I might say is a limited number of people they want to know about the potential acquisition. So, Reed, I'll come to you first. Could you talk a little bit about guidance you would give to partners about what you've seen work well with who they share information with, what they share, when they share it, and how they go about doing that? James, I'll come to you with the same question after that.
Yeah. I mean, you nailed it, right? Like for a period of time during diligence, you have 2 jobs, and we hear that from people all the time. I'm trying to answer the question as short as I possibly can. I mean, one of the things that I tell somebody that's about to join our organization as they start going into diligence is like, first and foremost, run the business, right? Like if we're going too fast and asking for too much, tell us that. Because the worst thing that can happen is you focus so much on diligence that A, your culture falls apart. That's bad. Mm-hmm. Or B, more likely, you start to see customers churn. That's going to impact your valuation, right? And so we're very careful with folks right up front. They hear that from me. Very first thing is like, look, you have a business to run the business, and we'll move at your speed, right? Like we don't have forever, obviously. I think when we've looked at businesses, there is a marked difference between those who are in Evolve and those who are not. right? Like night and day, right? And the folks that are in Evolve generally sail through diligence pretty quickly, and those who are not in Evolve, sometimes those can go a little bit longer, or even those who had been Evolve in the past. Like we've seen a lot of those where folks are really buttoned up and ready. This is probably a touchy way to say this, but I think it's just the brutal honesty is the best way. You never want to, broadcast to the entire organization that we're going through diligence. But if you're going to burden that on your own, if you're going to carry that burden on your own, you're probably not going to be successful. And candidly, that's generally a red flag for me as well, because it tells me, okay, this leader clearly has folks inside his organization that he or she doesn't trust, or they have no idea what's going on inside the business, right? And so, my hunch is, if you're a good potential M&A target, you've probably got some good, strong, trusted lieutenants on your team who probably want growth anyway, and who are probably going to leave your organization if they don't get that growth. And so we always recommend, find at least one or two people on your team that you can bring under the tent. We'll be glad to meet with them so they recognize that, hey, I know what an SLA is. I've worked tickets. I have restarted printers. I've restored from backups, right? I'm not very good at any of that stuff. I'm a salesperson, but I have done it. And so, let us have a conversation with those folks, because what most people think, whether you're, like Nate and you're self-funding this thing, or you're like James and myself here, where, you're working through a sponsor, they just assume that bigger must be bad. And that's not really always true. Now, you need to do your homework. And then, the third part of that question, I think that, the timing, I'm not sure if you asked this question, so if I'm answering an unasked question, I apologize. The timing of when you bring the rest of the staff under the tent is really entirely, I think, up to you and your sponsor, if you get to that point, right? But the big takeaway for me there is, it's a red flag for me if somebody's trying to do diligence all on their own.
Great. I appreciate that. Lot of insights there. So James, what do you have to add to that?
Sure. Reed made some great points. One of the things I think it's important is to fully do your own research to understand exactly what are you joining, right? If it's a full integration system, because the company that you join is going to dictate the message you give to your leaders on what their future looks like, what opportunities they're going to see. I try to put myself in the position of the people I'm working with. How do they view what we're doing? What does it impact them? What does it impact their family? Where do they see their future with whatever this M&A opportunity presents to us is going to take place? For me, I kind of think of, well, if I was in their shoes, what would I expect out of this? So we've created multiple ways of equity options so that we could provide a path to our leaders in where they could participate in the future of the business as well. And there's lots of ways to shape that so that you can keep their interest. Again, as both Nate and Reed said, you want to make sure you're incorporating the right people and not everybody into this. And you do want to make sure you're not alone in doing the due diligence process. I would 100% agree with what Reed said. The people that have been in Evolve are usually the most prepared for this, because they're talking about this. They're preparing. They're making sure that all their client agreements, their vendor agreements are in a row. And it will cut down your cost through due diligence too. The more that you have that prepared, the less you're relying on outsourced attorneys to gather this information for you and to help you. As far as preparing them, I actually had an opportunity to join New Charter about a year and a half prior to when I did, but it was a shock to my employees and the leadership team on this opportunity. So I backed off, prepared what our business could look like with them participating as we move forward. And then when I reapproached them, they were all on board to go forward with it. So I think there's a lot of ways to shape your opportunity for them, and think beyond yourself. Think of how this impacts them. What is it in their future? And make sure that they have an interest in it so that they're gonna push hard for the success.
Yeah, I think those are great points. You get the opportunity as a leader to look at numerous relationships. Certainly get a look at your employees. You go to look at your customers as well. I'm going to lead into a question on that in just a minute. But the point I wanted to make here is sometimes, or it's a story that doesn't get told, sadly, but the ability to evaluate or do due diligence on your potential acquirer, I believe, has been underestimated.
Yeah.
I can cite numerous examples of partners who went maybe with the highest offer of a firm, and it doesn't have to be private equity, but the point is they're not happy with the relationship because it didn't play out like they thought it would.
Right.
And that's probably a topic for a different webinar. But the point I want to make there is back tying that to leadership and due diligence. You owe it to yourself and to your team as a leader to do due diligence beyond simply what am I handing off to them? What boxes am I checking? Have I signed off on all this? So with that, Nate, I'm going to come back to you and talk a little bit about this. I had the pleasure of interviewing for a white paper that I wrote on business transitions a couple of MyTech employees. And it was interesting to have them talk about, having been through these transitions, how they see the impact at the team lead or even the individual contributor level as to how acquisition happened. And what I'm interested in here is leadership through an acquisition announcement. And if you were advising someone who said, you know what, I'm going to be up in front of my team and I need to lead them, not just through the day of the announcement, but let's say in the next 90 days post-announcement, do you have some guidance or some best practices you'd recommend sharing with the viewers on this call?
I think that's great questions. And this is always so, even what James said, like, you don't want to announce until you're ready to announce, because it could create problems, right? With your clients, it could create problems with your staff. And so there's definitely some trickiness around it. So some of the things that we've tried to do is, so for instance, the California location, the owner of that location is actually going to be participating in our all-company meeting this Friday. Not all of their staff, just the owner. So we're introducing that person to our team, to the rest of the team there, and then we're going to be following up with, and then he is communicating with his team later that day, individually. So I think those are some of the things we try and keep in mind. We're trying to be very intentional about how we communicate with the clients, so that they don't get surprised. One of the acquisitions we did back in 2015, I remember clients being mad that the owner didn't tell them that he was selling the business, and it seems a little odd that they would think that they would have a say in whether or not the owner sells their business or not. But you'll get weird stuff like that, I guess is my point. You'll get that weird stuff from team members, from clients. And I think it's just being as transparent as possible as to the why. One of the things that a big lesson learned, I think, and this applies to, I believe, staff and clients, is that, first of all, don't say nothing's going to change, because things will change. And the hope is that majority of that change is positive, but some of that change you might perceive as negative. But I think the thing that we've tried to communicate, and this was because we didn't do a very good job of this, again, that same acquisition we did in 2015, is how can we make sure that we're demonstrating or showing the value of, whether it be like HR benefits that are different or better, whether it be those things for the staff, leadership opportunities that are different or better, training opportunities, more structure, process, all the things that hopefully we're bringing to the table for that organization before we start making anything like extra work that they have to do. You know what I mean? So it's trying to like balance out, that show more value as you're asking them also to make change, right? I think the same thing applies to clients, is that, and we don't always do a great job of this, but trying to demonstrate and communicate things that we're bringing to the table above and beyond what their current team has been able to do, and find unique value that might be applicable to them before we start doing things like tool integration and maybe causing disruption in their operations, or maybe causing frustration, and because they're going to start associating everything with the acquisition or the merger and blaming that. So trying to put on that. So I think those are some of the communication things we've tried to do around timing, is try to humanize as much as possible, not just like via an email, other than like mass communication when just to the world, but humanize the communication to the staff and to clients that are valuable, and then and try and provide value before you start implementing change. So that way there's hopefully a buy-in to the bigger picture and the vision before you start moving their cheese and causing frustration.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to come right back to you with the next question because you already mentioned it. I flipped the coin and I'm going to go to Reed on the follow-up to this as the balance between Reed and James here. But you mentioned integration. Now we've gone through the overall development. We hope we have the culture. We've got due diligence. We've made the announcement. It's time to integrate. Some would say the first part of that was the easy part. You being in a situation, as you mentioned earlier, of full integration. I mentioned that from the previous webinar. Talk to us about leading during integration. You now have this work. It's not like your teams didn't have work to do before. It's almost back to the idea of now they have two jobs, depending upon how you choose to structure that integration. And then Reed, I'll come to you being in a different integration model and hear from you about how you would structure that integration work. Nathan, what do you think?
I think, in the Make a Difference language, if you've taken Dr. Larry Little's, read his book and done the personality profile, we have a lot of camels and turtles in our world that are technical folks. And in particular, if you're talking to a lion or monkey, they're typically like, yeah, whatever, I'll roll with the punches. But you get the other half of the equation, you get the camels and the turtles, and they like to process it. They like to see what's coming. They like to map it out and plan it out, get their check boxes together and their lists together. And so I think part of it is trying to do your best to communicate a plan and have some regular communication around to those that are going to be impacted by that plan, including trying to say, look, full integration is, 6-9 months out from where we start. And that includes, all the training and the process and the systems and all the things. And I think it's just trying to vision cast that, but also at the same time, give people the voice to be able to say, hey, something's not working, or this could disrupt something, so they can kind of pull the ripcord in or the emergency brake and say, we got to stop to assess before we just charge forward just because we have a checkbox that says we have to do this thing by this timeline. I think that ties very much to the last question about, trying to make sure you're delivering value before you disrupt too much. And sometimes we lose sight of the impact that we could have on our team or our clients by just charging forward on a checklist without recognizing the impact that checking that box could have. So I think that's really the big part of, and I would say that the other challenge that we had, especially early on, is it's really the extra work. Like, here you have full-time jobs doing your management leadership position you have, and now you have to do this extra thing. And so we realized that we didn't create enough capacity in the team that we expected to do that moving forward. And so we really tried to be intentional about, carving out some time of what is expected of them to help and assist with the due diligence, even though that's not always possible in the short term. That usually can play out as you have more time to plan for that. And my point in that is that having your existing leaders support and connect with and help be part of the training and guidance process with the oncoming team, and even to the point of connecting buddies, right? So like, if I'm a frontline worker and my role is this, what are other people in the organization have that role, so that they don't have to go to a manager go to a manager, and a manager go to their team member in order to get those people connected to talk and actually solve problems on a day-to-day basis. So I think just being intentional about some communication channels, leading, vision casting, and humanizing, I think, are the kind of the tips that we try and accomplish through integration.
Excellent. Reed, I'm going to come to you, and I don't need you to go through a detailed discussion of integration, but I want to circle back to the title of this webinar is Soft Skills for Hard Dollars.
Yep.
And the reality there is, without the integration going well, it's unlikely that you achieve the investment thesis for acquiring that company. And integration can result in churn of employees, churn of customers, taking too long and consuming too many resources, not getting the synergies that you might get. Now that I've laid those out there for you, how about speaking a little bit to the financial impact of leadership through that integration process and how it could impact the dollars and cents involved with that acquisition?
Yeah. Look, I think Nate unpacked a lot there already. I love the idea of buddies. We do the same thing. We found that to be super, super, super helpful. especially in new organizations, coming back to the camels and turtles, I'm more likely to talk to a muckier than I am to some new manager that I've never met, only on a Zoom call. Try to limit that as much as possible. But, here's what I know is, if you are in an MSP, you've experienced change, period. Right? Like we've gone from client server to cloud to AI. Like there's always some new thing, right? And so when we think about integration, we really just think about it as kind of one more change that's happening inside the space. And one of the pushbacks we always hear is, well, there's so much changing. Well, maybe this is a little too rough, but like if you doesn't want change, you probably picked the wrong industry to be in, regardless of whether or not you're going to go through an integration or not. But one of the ways you nailed it, right? Like if you go too fast, if you go too far, if you're unprepared, then that is absolutely going to churn employees most likely first, because they're going to see it first, which is going to trickle down to customers, right? And we all know that like the customer that you have is the easiest customer to keep, right? And they're the easiest customer to sell more stuff to. So the way we've tried to approach our integration strategy is over communicate the why, right? And when you think you've said it too many times, say it 15 more, right? And we've made a lot of mistakes here. We made a handful very recently where we had to move very quickly on some things, and we communicated well in pockets, but we did not communicate well at scale. Some of that is on us. Some of that is also on we didn't equip our leaders with the ability to be able to communicate that well at scale, right? So why? Like you've got to, if you're integrating for the sake of integration, then likely it's a bad formula. If you're integrating to draw larger gross margins, well, guess what? That should show up in the tools and tech and the pay that your techs are seeing, right? Like techs don't care about gross margin. What they care about is their tools, their tech, and their pay, right? And so make sure you're staying in front of that why. And a way that we measure that real quick, Scott, is post integration, we do a survey back that says like, did we do what we said we were going to do? Like when we worked with you to get you to join our team, we said we were going to do certain things. And did we do those? And I'd love to tell you that we bat 1,000. We don't, right? But with every single integration that we do after that, we have a whole list of lessons learned that we can go into the next one with. I feel Tom Rabb, very close friend of mine, runs our Eastern region out of Dart. He was our very first partner. His was a mess because we didn't even know what we were doing, right? But here we are 14 add-ons later, and we're getting better each time, which obviously has a direct correlation to P&L.
Outstanding. And you've led me perfectly, Reed. Thank you. Right into the next question as we enter the speed round. In the speed round, I'm going to ask you what's your biggest failure or lesson learned from leadership as it relates to M&A or business transition. Biggest failure or lesson learned. James, I'm coming to you first.
Oh, wow. I got to tag on to what Reed said. Communication. That is probably the most critical key, and proper communication at the right time and the right people is vital. First of all, as was mentioned, your team has got to be well notified, well aware of what you're doing. Any lack of that communication starts to show maybe some chinks in the armor. It's like, well, they don't know what they're doing. You want to make sure that you communicate well, and then obviously communicate with the clients on what this looks like. For a new charter, we have a lot of different opportunities with different operating companies that have specialties like in application development, web development, MSSP, cybersecurity. We're able to bring those different opportunities to all of the clients across the platform, and communicating that can be very difficult. And so communication is something that is probably where you could fail the most.
All right. We've got one vote for communication. Nathan, biggest lesson learned or failure? Doesn't have to be overly specific, but what do you say?
So I'm going to give a specific example of communication, because I think that's back in our 2015 was the acquisition of the location in Colorado. And so it was our first experience of a new location, first experience trying to manage across multiple geographies, realization that we had processes built out for a structure of an organization that was 3 times the size of the company we acquired, and thinking that they can miraculously just automatically jump into the processes that were built for an organization 3 times the size of that was problematic. So we went in, and I don't think we must have done it more overtly than I realized, but came in and the perception that we gave was that we have it all figured out. And then, because we didn't have it all figured out, and we still don't have it all figured out because we're always learning, that when things didn't go right, or if we didn't have answers to things, which you don't have answers for everything, then it was kind of like what James just said, like, well, what are these guys don't even know what they're doing, and it was really like this overly confident. And I don't think we intended that, but that's the way it came across. So I think being very deliberate about, look, we do have a plan and a structure and processes and documents, and we do have a lot of stuff in place, and we do have some things that we want to take advantage of, but we don't have it all figured out. And we also want to make sure that we're not overlooking the great things that have gotten you to where you are, and how can we maybe incorporate the great things that you're doing that we aren't doing, that we might be able to factor. And so I think it's again, realizing that if you're being merged or acquired into a larger organization, that you're likely going to take on that structure and that process and things like that, but recognizing that they still don't have it all figured out, and don't presume that you do, but also create the opportunity for the team to be able to contribute the great things that they are doing that you might not even realize that it could enhance the service to all your clients or all your staff.
Thank you for that. Reed, what do you think in leadership, lesson learned, or potential failure?
Yeah. This is a tough one because everybody knows it, but everybody thinks it doesn't apply to them. And that is your job as a leader, regardless of, doesn't matter what side of this coin you're on. Doesn't matter if you don't even go through this coin. If you are leading an organization, your number one job is to assess your talent and coach your talent. And also recognizing that you as a leader have a cap. Like I have a cap, right? Folks on my team have a cap. And as long as you're operating below that cap, life is good, right? But as soon as you start to push above that cap, things can get really uncomfortable for people really quickly. And everybody's heard the right people, right seats on the bus, all that kind of stuff. But, what I find myself thinking of back in like 2012 was, well, I don't need an operations manager. I can do that on my own, right? Like I'm a pretty smart guy. Well, no, I had reached my cap, and that's when we brought in, a really strong ops person. I had a good CFO in 2015, but we had reached the cap for that CFO, and we brought in a really smart CFO in that time frame. And so, because MSPs are hyper local, we tend to be loyal to a fault. And don't get me wrong, every person is important. But it's your job as the leader to make the hard calls on if you want to go through this process. Do you have the right folks on your team that are going to help you get there so that you can get the valuation and the sponsor or partnership that you want? And then B, are they ready for the other side of that? And having that conversation with them, I think is really critical. So there's probably more information than you asked for, Scott, but I just think I've always had that thing in the back of my head that says, that comment is only true for other people. No, it is true for you too, right? Like you got to make sure your talent is ready for where you are, but also ready for where you're going.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I'm going to end on that question from the standpoint of communication deeper as it related as well to process and right sizing as it relates to having the right team. I think back to the Peter Drucker quote of the bottleneck is always at the top of the bottle. And having the right people there, whether you are a 20-person MSP or you are stacked and layered all the way up in a private equity scenario. So with that, I want to thank our strong set of panelists. I want to again encourage anybody listening to and watching this to have the opportunity to get involved in IT Nation Evolve, to get involved in IT Nation Grow, to seek out the IT Nation events. And we appreciate your time, gentlemen, for joining us today. We appreciate anybody who's watching. Thank you.